Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're re-diving into one of ancient Egypt's most fascinating and bizarre chapters. The story of a lost city and a pharaoh who was almost erased from history. Imagine this. It's the 18th century, and European travelers in Egypt start noticing something strange. They're finding stone blocks, reused in later temples, that are covered in a completely unique and almost alien style of art. The figures are elongated, with slender necks, full lips, and prominent hips. It's nothing like the rigid, formal art we associate with the pharaohs. For decades, nobody knew what to make of it. Then, in the 1820s, a breakthrough. Explorers stumble upon the ruins of a vast, abandoned city in the desert, a place now called Amarna. This was the source of those strange blocks. This city, Akhenaten, was built from scratch in the middle of nowhere. But why? And by whom? This brings us to our main character, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, originally named Amenhotep IV. He did something unthinkable. He declared that all of Egypt's traditional gods Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis swore. False. There was only one true god, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and moved his entire court to his brand new desert city, dedicated solely to his new religion. This was a revolution that shook Egypt to its core. He closed the old temples, redirecting their immense wealth to his new cult. For about 17 years, Amarna was the glittering, vibrant heart of Egypt. But the moment Akhenaten died, it all came crashing down. His successors, including the famous Tutankhamun, quickly abandoned the city and the Aten religion. They restored the old gods, reopened the traditional temples, and the priests of Amun-Ra regained their power. But they weren't satisfied with just moving on. They wanted to pretend Akhenaten and his heresy never happened. This is where the mystery of the silent pharaoh begins. A systematic campaign was launched to wipe Akhenaten from memory. His statues were smashed. His name was chiseled out of monuments. On official king lists, his reign was simply omitted, as if it were a blank space in time. For thousands of years, he was effectively silenced, his revolutionary city left to be swallowed by the sand. It's only through the patient work of archaeologists, piecing together the fragments from his ruined city and the recycled blocks from later constructions, that we've been able to reconstruct his story. The discovery of Amarna wasn't just the finding of a city. It was the rediscovery of a lost king and a radical chapter of human history that powerful forces tried to bury forever. It's a powerful reminder that history is often written by the victors, but the truth, sometimes, refuses to stay silent. What do you think of this radical pharaoh? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more historical mysteries. See you next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're journeying back in time, thousands of years, to the land of pyramids and pharaohs. We're going to explore the very heart of ancient Egyptian civilization, its gods, its magnificent temples, and the incredible power structures that shape this legendary empire. So, grab your virtual explorer's hat, and let's head down the Nile. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a place of stunning monuments. It was a world teeming with gods and goddesses who walked, in spirit, among mortals. From Ra, the sun god who sailed across the sky each day in his solar barge, to Osiris, the king of the underworld. These deities were woven into the very fabric of daily life. They weren't distant figures. They influenced everything from the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought life to the fields, to the outcome of battles and the health of a child. Every aspect of life had a divine patron. Thoth, with the head of an ibis, was the god of wisdom, writing, and magic. Hathor, the cow goddess, presided over love, music, and joy. And then there was the fearsome Sekhet, the lioness-headed goddess of war and healing, a powerful protector and a formidable force to be reckoned with. The Egyptians saw the world as a constant interplay of these divine forces, a delicate balance between order, or asterisk, and chaos. Their mythology was rich with epic tales of creation, betrayal, and rebirth. stories that explained the world around them and their place within it. Now, how did the average Egyptian connect with these powerful gods? Well, that's where the temples come in. These weren't just places of worship like a modern church or mosque. An Egyptian temple was considered the literal home of a god on earth. Think of vast complexes like Karnak or Luxor. These were sprawling cities of faith, built and expanded over centuries. As you walked through the colossal gates, known as pylons, you'd enter a world designed to separate the sacred from the profane. Towering columns carved to look like papyrus stalks held up the sky, their surfaces covered in vibrant hieroglyphs and reliefs depicting gods and pharaohs. These images weren't just decoration. They were living texts, magical formulas that maintained the cosmic order. But here's a surprise. The general public was rarely allowed deep inside. The further you went into the temple, the more restricted it became. The innermost sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, which housed the cult statue of the god, was accessible only to the highest-ranking priests and, of course, the pharaoh. For ordinary people, their connection to the gods happened during spectacular festivals, when the statue of the deity would be carried out of the temple in a grand procession for all to see and worship. It was a massive celebration, a time of feasting, music, and a powerful, shared religious experience. So, if the common folk were kept at a distance, who held the real power within these sacred walls? Priests. The priesthood in ancient Egypt was a highly organized and influential institution. Serving a god was a full-time, professional career. They were the intermediaries between humanity and the divine. They performed the daily rituals essential to keeping the gods happy, waking the cult statue in the morning, clothing it, feeding it with offerings, and putting it to bed at night. These rituals were believed to be vital for the survival of the entire universe. But their role went far beyond just rituals. Temples were massive economic engines. They owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of people, from farmers and brewers to scribes and artisans. They collected taxes in the form of grain, livestock, and other goods. This made the high priests, especially the high priest of Amen at Karnak, some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the entire kingdom, sometimes even rivaling the pharaoh himself. They were not just spiritual leaders. They were administrators, scholars, astronomers, and political players. Their knowledge of writing, medicine, and the calendar gave them immense authority. Now let's talk about the most important figure of all, the pharaoh. The king of Egypt was not just a ruler. He was a living god. He was seen as the earthly incarnation of the god Horus, the son of Osiris. This concept, known as divine kingship, was the cornerstone of Egyptian society. The pharaoh was the chief high priest of every god in the land and the sole link between the divine realm and the mortal world. His primary duty was to maintain the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and order. Every time he commissioned a temple, won a battle, or performed a religious ritual, he was actively fighting off the forces of chaos and ensuring the stability of the kingdom and the universe itself. You can see this clearly in temple art. The pharaoh is almost always shown making offerings directly to the gods or smiting Egypt's enemies. These weren't just records of events. They were magical acts, reinforcing his divine role for all eternity. This divine status gave the pharaoh absolute authority. His word was law. He owned all the land in Egypt and the entire state apparatus, from the vizier down to the local tax collector, served his will. But it was a heavy burden. If the Nile didn't flood properly or if a famine struck, the people might see it as a sign that the pharaoh had failed in his duty to please the gods. His divinity was a source of ultimate power, but also of ultimate responsibility. So, let's connect the dots. You have a pantheon of powerful gods who control the universe. You have temples as their earthly homes, run by a wealthy and influential priesthood. And you have the pharaoh, a living god-king, whose job is to mediate between them all and maintain cosmic order. This intricate triangle of gods, priests, and the divine king formed the very foundation of ancient Egyptian civilization for over 3,000 years. It was a system where religion, politics, and the economy were completely intertwined. The grain offered to the god Amen at Karnak could be used to pay the workers building the pharaoh's tomb. The pharaoh's military victory was seen as a divine mandate. which in turn justified his rule and his support of the temples. This powerful synergy created a remarkably stable and enduring culture, one that continues to fascinate and inspire us to this day. The power of faith built the pyramids, carved the temples, and forged an empire that has truly stood the test of time. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into ancient Egypt. I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. Have you ever heard of the Pharaoh who tried to erase 1,000 years of history? The king who declared all the gods of Egypt, except one, were false. This isn't a Hollywood movie plot. It's the real story of one of history's most radical and mysterious rulers. Get ready, because we're about to journey back over 3,000 years to uncover the tale of the heretic king who turned ancient Egypt completely upside down. Our story begins around 1353 BCE. Egypt is at the zenith of its power and wealth, a sprawling empire built on military might and a rich spiritual tradition. For centuries, the Egyptians had worshipped a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses. Amarna, the king of the gods, was the most powerful, his priests in Thebes wielding immense influence and controlling a significant portion of the nation's wealth. The pharaoh was seen as the divine intermediary between the gods and humanity, a sacred duty passed down through generations. The stability of the entire cosmos, in turbu, depended on maintaining this ancient order. Into this world of unshakable tradition, a new pharaoh ascends the throne. Initially known as Amenhotep IV, his name literally meant Amen is satisfied. He was the son of the great Amenhotep III, who had presided over a golden age of prosperity and artistic splendor. For the first few years of his reign, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He followed the traditional path, honoring Amenra and the other gods, just as his father had. But beneath the surface, a revolutionary idea was taking root in the young king's mind. He began to shift his focus to a lesser-known solar deity, the Aten. The Aten wasn't depicted in human or animal form like other Egyptian gods. It was simply the physical disk of the sun, the source of all light and life on earth. In the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV made a move that sent shockwaves through the entire kingdom. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. This was more than just a name change. It was a declaration of war on the old ways. Akhenaten declared the Aten to be the one and only true god. Not the chief god, but the only god. All the others, Amenara, Osiris, Isis, Horus, were declared to be false idols. This was an unprecedented act. Imagine a society where religion permeated every aspect of daily life, from farming to childbirth, and suddenly being told that everything you and your ancestors believed was a lie. The powerful priesthood of Amun-Ra, who had been the spiritual backbone of the empire for centuries, were stripped of their power and wealth overnight. Their temples were closed, their estates confiscated, and the name of Amen was literally chiseled off monuments and tombs across the land. But Akhenaten's revolution didn't stop there. He decided that the old capital of Thebes, the city of Amen, was tainted. He ordered the construction of an entirely new city, built from scratch in the middle of the desert. He called it Akhenaten, meaning horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. This became the new political and religious center of Egypt. Tens of thousands of people moved to this new capital to serve their king and his one true god. The art of this period also underwent a radical transformation. Gone were the idealized, stoic figures of traditional Egyptian art. The Amarna style was strikingly different. Elongated heads, slender necks, curving hips, and protruding bellies. Akhenaten and his famous queen Nefertiti were depicted in intimate, naturalistic family scenes, playing with their daughters under the life-giving rays of the Aten. It was a stark departure from the rigid, formal poses of Pharaoh's past. For a brief moment, it seemed like a new era had dawned. So, why did he do it? What drove Akhenaten to take such a drastic, revolutionary path? Historians have debated this for centuries. Was he a true visionary? The world's first monotheist, who had a genuine spiritual epiphany? Did he see the Aten as a universal god, not just for Egyptians, but for all humanity? His great hymn to the Aten, a beautiful piece of poetry discovered in a tomb at Amarna, certainly suggests a profound and personal devotion. It speaks of the Aten as the sole creator, a loving father to all people, whose light sustains every living thing on earth. Or was his revolution a calculated political move? The priesthood of Amarna had become incredibly wealthy and powerful, perhaps even rivaling the pharaoh's own authority. By dismantling the old religion, was Akhenaten simply consolidating power, cutting the priests down to size and reasserting the absolute supremacy of the pharaoh? By making himself the sole intermediary to the one true God, he placed himself at the absolute center of the universe, with a level of divine authority no pharaoh had ever claimed before. The truth is likely a complex mix of both. Akhenaten was probably a man of genuine, fervent belief, who also understood the political advantages of his religious revolution. For about 17 years, Akhenaten ruled from his desert city, dedicated to the Aten. He and Nefertiti presided over this new world they had created, but outside the bubble of Akhenaten, the empire was facing challenges. Neglecting foreign policy and traditional alliances may have weakened Egypt's grip on its territories, and within Egypt itself, the common people, who had relied on their local gods for comfort and protection for millennia, were likely confused and resentful. Their entire spiritual world had been dismantled. Akhenaten's death, around 1336 BCE, marked the beginning of the end for his revolution. His successors, including the famous boy king Tutankhamun, who was likely his son, quickly realized that the new religion was unsustainable. Tutankhamun's original name was Aten*, but he changed it to Tutank*, Amun*, signaling a return to the old ways. The royal court abandoned the city of Akhenaten, and it was left to crumble back into the desert sands. The reaction against Akhenaten was swift and brutal. The old priesthoods, restored to power, set about erasing him from history. His name was hacked from monuments, his statues were smashed, and his new city was dismantled. He was referred to in later king lists, not by name, but simply as that criminal or the enemy from Akhenaten. For nearly 3,000 years, they were successful. Akhenaten, the heretic king, was almost completely forgotten. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists unearthed the ruins of his lost city, Amarna, that his incredible story was pieced back together. We rediscovered the unique art, the revolutionary theology, and the radical figure who dared to challenge an entire civilization. Was Akhenaten a madman or a visionary? A political opportunist or a spiritual genius? He remains one of history's most compelling and controversial figures. His attempt to reshape the world failed, but the audacity of his vision continues to fascinate and inspire us to this day. He reminds us that even in the most ancient and traditional of societies, a single individual can dare to imagine a completely different reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into ancient Egypt. If you found the story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and let me know in the comments what you think about. See you next time. Have you ever heard of a pharaoh who tried to completely rewrite 2,000 years of Egyptian history? A king who abandoned the gods of his ancestors, built a brand new capital in the middle of nowhere, and sparked an artistic revolution unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. This isn't a fantasy novel. It's the true story of Akhenaten and his sun-drenched city, Akhenaten. Imagine ancient Egypt. You're probably picturing pyramids, the Sphinx, and powerful gods like Osiris and Amun-Ra. For centuries, this was the unshakable foundation of Egyptian society. The priests of Amun-Ra, based in the sprawling temple complex at Karnak in Thebes, held immense wealth and political power, sometimes even rivaling the pharaoh himself. But then, a new pharaoh named Amenhotep IV ascended the throne, and he had a radical, world-changing idea. He declared that there was only one true god, the Aten, represented as the physical disk of the sun, whose rays ended in tiny hands, offering the Ankh, the symbol of life, to the royal family. This wasn't just a minor religious tweak. It was a complete upheaval. He changed his own name from Amarna, which means Aman is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. He then made the most audacious move of all. He decided to abandon Thebes, the traditional capital, and build an entirely new city dedicated solely to his one god. He chose a virgin site, a desolate, crescent-shaped plain on the east bank of the Nile, about midway between Thebes and Memphis. Legend says he chose this spot because the morning sun rose in a natural break in the eastern cliffs, perfectly framing the solar disk. It was a place untouched by the worship of any other god. He named it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. The founding of this city was marked by grand ceremonies, with Akhenaten himself laying out the boundaries with a series of massive stone stelae, or carved tablets, declaring the land sacred to the Aten forever. Construction began at a frantic pace. Tens of thousands of laborers, artisans, and officials flocked to this new royal project. Unlike older cities that grew organically over centuries, Akhenaten was a planned city, built from scratch in the desert. At its heart was the great Aten Temple, a revolutionary structure itself. Unlike the dark, mysterious temples of the old gods, the Temple of the Aten was open to the sky, with vast courtyards filled with offering tables, allowing the sun's rays to flood the entire space. There was no shadowy inner sanctum, no hidden statue of the god, because the god was visibly present in the sky above. The city was designed around a central royal road. Along this road were the grand palaces, including the North Palace, famously associated with Queen Nefertiti, and the king's official residence, connected by a bridge over the road where the royal family could appear to the people. Flanking these official buildings were the administrative offices, archives where the famous Amarna letters were later discovered, and workshops for sculptors and craftsmen. So, what was it like to actually live in Akhenaten? For the elite, life was luxurious. Villas were spacious, with reception halls, private bedrooms, bathrooms, and beautiful gardens with pools. Excavations have revealed painted floors and walls depicting vibrant scenes from nature, reflecting the Aten's role as the creator of all life. Food was plentiful, with offerings from the temple being redistributed to the officials. For the common workers who built the city, life was much harder. They lived in a tightly packed grid of small, mud brick houses in what's known as the workers' village. Archaeological evidence from their tombs shows they suffered from malnutrition, strenuous labor, and a high rate of workplace injuries. They were the backbone of Akhenaten's vision, but they paid a heavy price. Yet even here in this humble village we find small household shrines, not just to the Aten, but secretly to the old familiar gods like Bas and Turet, suggesting that Akhenaten's revolution may not have fully captured the hearts and minds of the common people. Perhaps the most startling legacy of this period is its art. The Amarna art style is instantly recognizable and completely breaks from the rigid, idealized forms of traditional Egyptian art. For millennia, pharaohs were depicted as youthful, muscular, and perfect. But Akhenaten had himself and his family portrayed with shockingly realistic, almost exaggerated features. An elongated skull, a long, slender neck, a drooping jaw, wide hips, and a soft, protruding belly. Why this drastic change? Scholars have debated this for decades. Some once thought Akhenaten suffered from a medical condition, but a more widely accepted theory is that this was a deliberate theological statement. Akhenaten saw himself as the sole intermediary between the Aten and humanity. The Aten was a universal creator, both masculine and feminine, the father and mother of all creation. By portraying himself with androgynous features, Akhenaten may have been visually representing himself as the earthly embodiment of this all-encompassing, life-giving deity. This new art style also gave us scenes of unprecedented intimacy. We see Akhenaten and Nefertiti playing with their daughters, kissing them, and mourning the loss of a child. These are not stiff, formal portraits of divine rulers. They are tender, human moments of a family. It has a glimpse into the private life of a pharaoh that we simply do once see in any other period of Egyptian history. These images, carved in stone, were meant to show the royal family as the perfect family, the conduits through which the Aten's blessings flowed to the world. But this golden city, this horizon of the Aten, was destined to be short. Akhenaten's revolution was deeply unpopular with the old priesthood and likely with much of the general population who felt their traditional beliefs were under attack. After Akhenaten's death, around 17 years into his reign, his city and his religion quickly crumbled. His successor, who we now know as the famous Tutankhamun, was originally named Tutankhamun. He abandoned Akhenaten, moved the court back to Thebes, and restored the worship of the old gods, especially Amarna. The name of Akhenaten was systematically erased. His temples were torn down, his statues smashed, and his name was chiseled off monuments. Akhenaten was abandoned to the desert sands, becoming a ghost city for over 3,000 years. The heretic Pharaoh and his son's city were all but forgotten. A brief, strange chapter buried by history. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists rediscovered the ruins, which we now call Amarna. Today, Amarna gives us a unique, frozen-in-time snapshot of ancient Egyptian life. Because the city was built and abandoned so quickly, it provides a clearer picture of urban planning and daily existence than cities that were inhabited for thousands of years. It's the story of a visionary, a radical, a heretic, whatever you wish to call him, who dared to challenge millennia of tradition to build his perfect world. And though his world didn't last, its ghostly echo in the desert sands continues to fascinate and challenge our understanding of ancient Egypt. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey to the lost city of Aten. If you enjoyed this glimpse into a forgotten world, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories from the ancient past. See you next time. Have you ever seen a face so famous, so instantly recognizable, yet the story behind it remains one of history's greatest mysteries? This is the face of Nefertiti, the great royal wife of Pharaoh. Her name means the beautiful one has come. And for over 3,000 years, her legacy has captivated the world. But was she merely a beautiful queen, or was she something more? A coroller, a pharaoh in her own right. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of time to uncover the truth about the powerful woman behind the iconic bust. Our story begins around 1370 BC in the sun-drenched land of ancient Egypt during the opulent 18th dynasty. This was a time of immense wealth and power. The era of the New Kingdom. Nefertiti enters the historical record when she marries a prince named Amenhotep IV. Now, this wasn't just any royal marriage. From the very beginning, their partnership was destined to shatter tradition and reshape an entire civilization. When Amenhotep IV ascended the throne, he and Nefertiti embarked on a radical revolution. They abandoned the pantheon of traditional Egyptian gods, a system that had been in place for centuries, in favor of a single deity, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. This was a seismic shift. The pharaoh changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and Nefertiti was right there with him, a central figure in this new monotheistic faith. This wasn't just a quiet, personal belief. They moved the entire capital city from Thebes to a brand new, purpose-built city in the desert called Akhenaten, known today as Amarna. And in the art of this period, something extraordinary happens. Nefertiti isn't just depicted standing behind her husband, as was typical for queens. She's shown in positions of power, often equal in size to Akhenaten. We see her driving her own chariot, leading worship to the Aten, and even in a pose usually reserved for the pharaoh alone, smiting Egypt's enemies. In many carvings, the royal couple and their daughters are shown being blessed by the rays of the Aten, which end in little hands, touching only Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The message was clear. They were the sole intermediaries between the Aten and humanity. This was a partnership of immense power. The evidence for Nefertiti's influence is overwhelming. Inscriptions give her a string of powerful titles, like Great of Praises, Lady of All Women, and Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt. She was more than just a supportive spouse. She was a co-protagonist in this grand religious and political drama. Some Egyptologists believe she was even elevated to the status of co-regent, ruling alongside Akhenaten with almost equal authority. This would have made her one of the most powerful women in the ancient world. And then there's the bust. Discovered in 1912 in the workshop of the sculptor Thutmose in Amarna, This painted limestone masterpiece is more than just a pretty face. It's a symbol of her status. The distinctive blue crown she wears is unique to her. It's not a crown worn by any other queen or pharaoh before or after her. This unique regalia suggests a unique role, a status that demanded its own special symbol of power. The bust, with its serene expression, elegant long neck, and powerful gaze, perfectly encapsulates the charisma and authority she must have possessed. It's no wonder it has become a global icon of beauty and power. Now, here's where the mystery deepens. Around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, Nefertiti's name suddenly vanishes from historical records. Just gone. One of the most prominent women in Egypt, at the height of her influence, disappears without a trace. What could have happened? For years, historians debated several theories. Did she fall out of favor with Akhenaten? Did she die suddenly from a plague that swept through Amarna? Or did something even more incredible happen? A fascinating and increasingly popular theory suggests that Nefertiti didn't disappear at all. Instead, she transformed. Some Egyptologists propose that she took on a new name and a new role, that of Pharaoh. There's evidence of a mysterious co-ruler who reigned alongside Akhenaten in his final years, and then possibly ruled alone after his death. This pharaoh's name was Ankheper. The name Nefertiti is incredibly similar to one of Nefertiti's full names. It translates to "beautiful are the manifestations of the Aten. The beautiful one has come." Sound familiar? Furthermore, grammatical clues in some inscriptions of this pharaoh's name suggest the ruler was female. Could it be that upon Akhenaten's death, or perhaps even just before, Nefertiti adopted a kingly persona to rule Egypt herself? If true, she would join the very exclusive club of female pharaohs, like Hatshepsut. She wouldn't have just been she would have become the ultimate authority, the king of Egypt. This theory would explain her sudden disappearance. She didn't vanish. She simply stepped into a new, unprecedented role, adopting the titles and duties of a pharaoh to navigate the turbulent political waters. Following her husband's controversial reign, the Amarna period was an unstable time. After Akhenaten's death, the old priests of Amarna were eager to regain power, and the old ways were quickly restored. The city of Akhenaten was abandoned, and the names of Akhenaten and his family were systematically erased from monuments in an attempt to wipe their heresy from history. This is likely why the story of Nefertiti and her potential rule as pharaoh became so muddled and lost. The succeeding pharaohs, especially the famous Tutankhamun, who was likely her stepson, or Sunovasa. This returned to tradition. The revolution was over. If Nefertiti did rule as Pharaoh Nefertiti, her reign would have been a brief, transitional period, a last stand for the Atenist faith before it was extinguished. So, who was Nefertiti? She was undeniably a queen of extraordinary influence and power, a partner in a revolution that turned an empire on its head. She was a religious icon, a political force, and a mother to 6 daughters. But was she more? The evidence strongly suggests she stepped beyond the traditional role of a queen. Whether she ruled as an official co-regent or as the pharaoh Nefertiti, it's clear she was no mere figurehead. She was a ruler, a leader whose story was almost completely erased from history. The mystery of her final years and her final resting place continues to elude archaeologists. Her tomb has never been definitively found, but her legacy endures, not just in this stunning bust, but in the tantalizing clues she left behind in the desert sand clues that tell of a woman who dared to rule in a man's world, a queen who became a king, a beautiful one who came and conquered. What do you think? Was Nefertiti a pharaoh in her own right? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more dives into history's greatest mysteries. See you next time. Imagine a pharaoh so obsessed with his vision that he nearly brought the world's greatest empire to its knees. This isn't a work of fiction. This is the true story of Akhenaten, the heretic king of Egypt. For centuries, we've been captivated by his religious revolution, his radical art, and his beautiful wife Nefertiti. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the sun god he worshipped cast a dark shadow over the land of the Nile? Today, we're peeling back the gilded facade to reveal the chaos and decline that defined the final years of Akhenaten's reign. To understand the crisis, we must first understand the man. Born Amenhotep IV, he inherited a stable, prosperous Egypt from his father, Amenhotep III. The empire was at its zenith, wealthy beyond imagination, its influence stretching from Nubia to the Near East. The traditional pantheon, led by the powerful god Amarna, was the bedrock of society, its priesthood wielding immense political and economic power. But the new pharaoh had a different vision. Early in his reign, he began to elevate a minor solar deity, the Aten, the physical disk of the sun, above all other gods. This wasn't just a shift in preference. It was the beginning of a revolution that would shake Egypt to its core. He changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and in a move of stunning audacity, he abandoned Thebes, the traditional religious capital, for over 1,000 years. He moved his entire court to a brand new, purpose-built city in the middle of the desert, a place he called Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten today, known as Amarna. This city was to be the pure center of his new faith. Here, and only here, the Aten would be worshipped. All other gods were declared false. Their temples were closed, and their revenues were diverted to fund his new capital and religion. This was the world's first known attempt at monotheism, and it was a declaration of war on centuries of Egyptian tradition. From the outside, Akhenaten must have seemed like a bustling, vibrant utopia dedicated to the sun. The art style broke all conventions. The pharaoh was depicted with an elongated skull, a drooping belly, and feminine hips. It was a radical departure from the idealized, muscular figures of the past. But behind this artistic flourish, the foundations of the empire were cracking. Akhenaten's obsession with the Aten was all-consuming. While he composed beautiful hymns to his god and presided over elaborate ceremonies, the day-to-day business of running an empire was neglected. The economy, once the envy of the ancient world, began to falter. The closure of the traditional temples was a catastrophic economic shock. These weren't just places of worship. They were massive economic engines. They owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of people from priests to farmers to craftsmen, and managed trade networks. When Akhenaten shut them down and seized their wealth, he didn't just offend the gods. He created mass unemployment and disrupted the entire supply chain. The flow of grain, livestock, and goods that had sustained the population was thrown into disarray. At Amarna, archaeological evidence reveals that while the elite lived in luxury, the common workers in the city suffered from malnutrition and disease, their skeletons showing signs of grueling labor and poor diet. The utopia was built on the backs of a suffering populace. Meanwhile, beyond Egypt's borders, predators were circling. The pharaohs before Akhenaten had maintained their empire through a careful mix of military might and shrewd diplomacy. They corresponded regularly with vassal kings in the Near Eastern places like Syria and Canaan, exchanging gifts, arranging marriages, and, when necessary, sending armies to keep them in line. We know this because of an incredible discovery. The Amarna letters, a trove of clay tablets found at Akhenaten. They are the actual diplomatic correspondence from this period, and they paint a desperate picture. Letter after letter from loyal vassal rulers begs the pharaoh for help. They speak of invasions from rival powers like the Hittites, of rebellions stirring within their cities, and of treacherous neighbors plotting to seize their lands. Rebahada, the king of Byblos, sent over 50 letters, his tone growing more frantic with each one. He pleaded for soldiers, for grain, for the pharaoh to simply pay attention. "The war against me is severe," he wrote. "If the king does not turn his ear to his servant, then Byblos is lost." But his pleas, and those of many others, fell on deaf ears. Akhenaten, lost in his religious fervor, remained indifferent. He was focused on the heavens, not on the earthly matters of his crumbling empire. The Egyptian military, once the most feared force in the region, was left to languish. Without direction from the throne, generals were powerless to intervene. Garrisons in foreign lands were isolated and undersupplied. As Akhenaten ignored the world, the Hittite Empire, Egypt's great rival to the north, saw its chance. They pushed south, chipping away at Egypt's sphere of influence, absorbing vassal states that had once paid tribute to the pharaoh. The vast buffer zone that had protected Egypt for generations was evaporating. The wealth that had flowed into Egypt from its Empire gold, from Nubia, timber from Lebanon, tribute from Canaan slowed to a trickle. The economic crisis at home was now compounded by a foreign policy disaster by King Egypt. Discontent was simmering. For the average Egyptian, Akhenaten's revolution was a disaster. Their gods had been outlawed, their festivals cancelled, their afterlife beliefs thrown into question. Akhenaten's religion was exclusive. Only he and Nefertiti could truly communicate with the Aten. Everyone else was expected to worship the royal family as intermediaries. This was a cold, distant faith compared to the rich, personal traditions they had known. Imagine being told that Osiris, the god who promised you resurrection and eternal life, was a lie. The spiritual void was immense, and it was filled with fear and resentment. The heretic king was not just seen as misguided, he was seen as a threat to Mat, the cosmic order of truth, balance, and justice that the pharaoh was sworn to uphold. The end of Akhenaten's 17-year reign is shrouded in mystery. He simply disappears from the historical record. Around 1336 BC was he overthrown. Did he die of a plague that swept through Amarna? We don't know for sure. But what followed was a period of frantic damage control. His immediate successors, the enigmatic Smenkhkare and the young Tutankhamun, famously known as King Tut, began the process of undoing his entire revolution. Tutankhamun, whose birth name was Tutank**, Otan**, changed it to signal his return to the old ways. He issued a decree, known as the Restoration Stela, which described the terrible state of the nation he inherited. It reads, "The temples of the gods and goddesses had fallen into ruin. The land was in distress. The gods had turned their backs on this land. The court abandoned the city of Akhenaten, leaving it to crumble back into the desert sands. The names of Akhenaten and the Aten were systematically erased from monuments, a practice known as damnatio memoriae, damnation of memory. His statues were smashed. His inscriptions were chiseled out. It was a concerted effort to pretend he had never existed. For nearly 3,000 years, it worked. Akhenaten was forgotten, a lost chapter in Egypt's glorious history, until his rediscovery in the 19th century. The reign of Akhenaten serves as a powerful cautionary tale. He was a man of conviction, a true revolutionary, but his single-minded obsession blinded him to his duties as a ruler. In his quest to remake heaven, he allowed his earthly kingdom to fall into chaos. He neglected his economy, his people, and his empire, leaving a legacy not of enlightenment, but of decline. It would take generations for subsequent pharaohs, like the great military leaders Seti I and Ramesses II, to restore Egypt's wealth, stability, and international prestige. Akhenaten may have worshipped the sun, but his reign was an eclipse from which Egypt only barely recovered. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Egypt. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments what you think was Akhenaten, a visionary or a failed king. See you next time. Upbeat, mysterious music begins, then fades slightly to background. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're journeying back more than 3,000 years to the sands of ancient Egypt to uncover the story of its most famous pharaoh, the boy king, Tutankhamun. Now, when you hear that name, what comes to mind? A dazzling golden mask, a tomb filled with unimaginable treasures, and whispers of a deadly curse, right? But the true story of Tutankhamun is far more dramatic and politically charged than you might imagine. It's a tale of a boy thrust onto the throne in a time of religious chaos, a king who had to clean up the mess left by his father, and whose own legacy was nearly wiped from history. So, grab your virtual torches, and let's step into the world of Tutankhamun. It's a story of power, faith, and a desperate struggle to restore order to a fractured kingdom. To truly understand Tutankhamun, we first have to understand the world he was born into. And that world was defined by one man. His father, Akhenaten. Akhenaten wasn't just any pharaoh. He was a revolutionary, a heretic. For over 1,000 years, Egypt had worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, with the powerful sun god, Amarna, Aten. The priests of Amarna, based in the great city of Thebes, held immense wealth and political influence, rivaling even the pharaoh himself. But Akhenaten changed everything. He declared that there was only one god, the Aten, represented as the physical disk of the sun. He shut down the temples to the old gods, seized their assets, and effectively fired the entire priesthood. He then abandoned Thebes, the traditional capital, and built a brand new city in the middle of the desert, a city dedicated solely to his one true god. He called it Akhenaten, which means horizon of the Aten. Today, we know it as Amarna. This was a religious and social earthquake. Imagine the most powerful institutions in your country being dismantled overnight. That's what Akhenaten did for the average Egyptian, who had prayed to gods like Osiris, Isis, and Horus. For generations, this was deeply unsettling. Their entire understanding of the cosmos, of life, and the afterlife was turned upside down. Into this turbulent world, a boy named Tutankhamun was born. Yes, his original name was Tut, meaning living image of the Aten. He was born and raised in the new city of Akhenaten, steeped in his father's monotheistic religion. Life in Amarna would have been strange and isolated compared to the bustling metropolis of Thebes. Art, culture, religion, everything revolved around the Aten and the royal family, who were seen as the sole intermediaries between humanity and this one god. But Akhenaten's revolution was not destined to last. His reign was followed by a murky and short-lived period, possibly with a mysterious pharaoh named Smenkhare. And then Akhenaten's grand experiment came to an end. The throne was now empty, and the kingdom was in turmoil. The old priesthood was plotting a comeback, the military was restless, and the people were yearning for a return to the familiar traditions. The weight of this entire broken kingdom was about to fall on the shoulders of a child. At the tender age of just 9 years old, Tutankhamun became the new pharaoh of Egypt. A 9-year-old king cannot rule alone. Young Tutankhamun was guided by powerful advisors, most notably the experienced court official and the general of the army's horse. These were shrewd, pragmatic men who saw the writing on the wall. Akhenaten's revolution had failed. It was unpopular. It had weakened the state, and it was time to turn back the clock. One of the first and most significant acts of the young king's reign was a public declaration of change. He officially abandoned his father's god. He changed his own name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, meaning living image of Amen, signaling a clear break from the Atenist heresy and a return to the old pantheon. His wife, Enki-Simpatan, also changed her name to Enki-Sin. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a political earthquake in its own right. It was a public announcement that the Amarna period was over. The royal court abandoned the desert city of Akhenaten, leaving it to crumble back into the sand, and moved the capital back to the traditional centers of power, Memphis and Thebes. The message was clear. The old gods were back, and so was the old way of life. The restoration was a massive undertaking. The temples to Amun-Ra and the other gods, which had been closed and fallen into disrepair, were reopened and lavishly restored. Tutankhamun's restoration stele, a large stone slab inscribed with his decrees, tells us this in his own words. It describes the temples of the gods and goddesses as having fallen into ruin, shrines overgrown with weeds. The decree proclaims that the young king has re-established all that was ruined and expelled deceit throughout the two lands. He poured money into these restoration projects, commissioning new statues and funding the priesthoods that his father had disbanded. This was a massive PR campaign designed to win back the hearts and minds of the people and, crucially, to appease the powerful and now reinstated priests of Amun-Ra. Bedouin's Tutankhamun wasn't just a religious reformer, he was a political healer, stitching the country back together after the deep divisions created by his father. He was effectively erasing Akhenaten's legacy and pretending the whole affair had just been a terrible dream. And the erasure of Akhenaten was systematic and brutal. This wasn't just about ignoring him. It was about actively trying to wipe him from the pages of history. Akhenaten was branded the enemy or that criminal in official inscriptions. His name was chiseled out of monuments. The city he built, Akhenaten, was dismantled. Its stone blocks reused for new construction projects by later pharaohs. This practice, known as damnatio memoria, was the ultimate punishment in ancient Egypt. To have your name forgotten was to cease to exist for eternity. They wanted to ensure that no one would ever worship the Aten again or follow in the footsteps of the heretic king. Tutankhamun, willingly or not, presided over the beginning of this process. His own inscriptions carefully distance himself from his father, framing himself as the savior who brought the gods back to Egypt. It's a fascinating, if ruthless, example of political rebranding. The new regime needed to completely discredit the old one to secure its own legitimacy. And so, the father who tried to change the world was condemned to be forgotten by the son who had to fix it. Tutankhamun's reign lasted for about a decade. He transitioned from a boy king into a young man. Evidence from his tomb shows him as an active pharaoh depicted hunting, leading military campaigns, and performing religious ceremonies. He was not just a puppet. He was the ruler of Egypt during this critical period of recovery, but his life was cut short. Around the age of 19, Tutankhamun died. The exact cause of his death has been debated by scholars for decades. Was it an accident? Was it an illness? Was it murder? Scans of his mummy have revealed a knee fracture that became infected as well as evidence of malaria, suggesting his death was likely the result of a combination of health issues and a weakened immune system rather than foul play. His death threw the royal succession into crises. Once again, he left no surviving heir, and his young widow, Akhenaten, was left in a desperate position. A letter believed to be from her was even sent to the rival Hittite king, begging him to send one of his sons to marry her and become pharaoh of Egypt. Truly shocking and unprecedented request that shows just how volatile the situation was. Following Tutankhamun's death, his advisor briefly took the throne, followed by the general Horemheb. It was Horemheb who truly finished the job of erasing the Amarna period. He intensified the persecution of Akhenaten's memory and even removed Tutankhamun's name from some king lists, lumping his reign in with the heretical period. For the next 3,000 years, Tutankhamun, the boy king who restored the gods, was himself largely forgotten. He became a minor, transitional figure, lost in the sands of time, and that's how his story would have ended, if not for a stroke of incredible luck. Because his tomb, unlike the grand tombs of more powerful pharaohs like Ramesses the Great, was small and insignificant. It was quickly buried by the debris from the construction of a later tomb and was overlooked by tomb robbers for millennia. So when the British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of painstaking searching, finally broke through that sealed doorway in 1922, he didn't just find treasure. He found the ghost of a lost king. The discovery of Tutankhamun's intact tomb was the single greatest archaeological find of all time. It resurrected him, making his name more famous than he ever could have dreamed. The boy king, who was nearly erased from history, is now the most famous pharaoh of all. His story is a powerful reminder of how history is written and rewritten by the victors. He was the son who had to undo his father's revolution, the peacemaker who restored order to a kingdom on the brink, and the forgotten king whose rediscovery captivated the entire world. The golden mask, the glittering chariots, the priceless jewels, they are spectacular, but they are just the final chapter. The real story lies in the turbulent world he inherited, and the delicate balancing act he performed to save his kingdom from itself. His legacy isn't just about gold, it's about the incredible fragility of power, faith, and memory itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Egypt. I hope you found the real story of King Tut as fascinating as I do. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving back into the sands of time to uncover the final, dramatic chapters of one of history's most radical figures, the Pharaoh Akhenaten. If you missed our previous discussions on his revolutionary reign, be sure to check them out. But now, we explore what happened to after his death. A story of deliberate erasure, surprising legacies, and a debate that still rages thousands of years later. Akhenaten ruled for 17 years, turning Egypt upside down with his worship of a single god. Yet, he built a magnificent new capital, Akhenaten, a city dedicated to this sun disk. But when he died, the backlash was swift and brutal. The old priesthoods of Amarna, who had been stripped of their power and wealth, wasted no time in restoring the old ways. Akhenaten's own son, Tutankhamun, famously abandoned his father's city and his father's god, returning the court to Thebes and reopening the traditional temples. But this restoration wasn't enough. For the traditionalists, Akhenaten wasn't just a failed king. He was a heretic, an enemy of the gods, and of Mat, the divine order of the universe. To simply move on was unthinkable. His memory had to be obliterated. This process is known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It was a systematic effort to erase a person from history, as if they never existed. Akhenaten's name was chiseled out of cartouches on temple walls. His statues were smashed, their faces disfigured, their bodies broken into pieces and buried in pits. The beautiful city of Aten, Madande Amarna, was abandoned to the desert, its stone blocks quarried, and reused for other pharaohs' building projects, ironically, preserving them for archaeologists to find centuries later. Official king lists were rewritten to jump straight from Akhenaten's father to Horemheb, completely omitting Akhenaten, Smenkhare, Nefertiti. To future generations of Egyptians, it was as if this entire period had been a terrible dream, best forgotten. For thousands of years, this campaign of destruction was successful. Akhenaten was a ghost, a forgotten footnote. In the long line of pharaohs, it wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists began excavating the ruins of Amarna, that the story of the heretic king was pieced back together. They found the smashed statues, the abandoned city, and the stunning artwork that defined his era. They unearthed a revolution that had been violently suppressed. The rediscovery of Akhenaten sparked a firestorm of interest, not just among Egyptologists, but among thinkers and theologians. Here was a pharaoh who, more than 1,000 years before the major monotheistic religions we know today, had declared there was only one god. This raised a tantalizing question. Could Akhenaten's Atenism have influenced the development of Judaism, and by extension, Christianity and Islam? Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was one of the most famous proponents of this idea. In his final book, Moses and Monotheism, Freud proposed a radical theory. He argued that Moses wasn't a Hebrew but an Egyptian, a high-ranking official in Akhenaten's court. When Akhenaten's revolution failed, Freud suggested, this Egyptian Moses led a group of followers to early Israelites out of Egypt, taking the core principles of Atenism with him. According to Freud, the abstract, universal, and singular nature of Akhenaten's Aten was the direct precursor to the Hebrew God, Yahweh. He even pointed to similarities between Akhenaten's great hymn to the Aten and Psalm 104 from the Bible. Both praise a single, universal creator God who brings light and life to all creation, to all peoples, not just the Egyptians or the Hebrews. The parallels are undeniably striking. You have passages in both that speak of the sun rising and darkness fleeing, of God providing for all creatures, great and small, across the entire earth. However, most historians and archaeologists today view Freud's theory with heavy skepticism. There is simply no direct archaeological or textual evidence to support the idea of an Egyptian Moses, or a direct transmission of Atenism to the early Israelites. The timeline doesn't quite fit, and the Exodus story itself has a complex and debated history. While the similarities in the texts are fascinating, they could also be explained by a shared cultural environment in the ancient Near East, where ideas about divinity and creation circulated and evolved. It's possible that both traditions were drawing from a common well of religious thought, rather than one directly birthing the other. So, while a direct line from Akhenaten to Moses is unlikely, we can't completely dismiss the echo. Akhenaten's experiment proved that monotheistic thought was possible long before it became mainstream. He put an idea into the world, and even though his own people rejected it, ideas have a way of surviving, of lingering in the cultural memory. Even if subconsciously, it's a powerful reminder that history isn't always a straight line, but a complex web of influences and inspirations. This brings us to the final, and perhaps most personal, question about Akhenaten. Was he a visionary prophet or a dangerous madman? How do we judge this man who defied millennia of tradition and plunged his kingdom into chaos for the sake of his personal faith? The case for him being a prophet is compelling. He appears as a man ahead of his time, a mystic who had a profound personal experience of the divine. He saw a universal truth that a single creative force animated the entire world, and he dedicated his life to sharing that vision. His hymns portray a God of love and life, not just for Egypt, but for all humanity. From this perspective, he was a courageous spiritual pioneer, the world's first individual who dared to stand alone against an entire system for what he believed was right. On the other hand, the argument for madness is just as strong, especially when viewed through the lens of a ruler's responsibility. As Pharaoh, Akhenaten was meant to be the shepherd of his people, the guarantor of stability and prosperity. Instead, his religious obsession led him to neglect his duties. He closed the traditional temples, which were not just places of worship but also the economic and administrative centers of the country. This caused massive social and economic disruption. He moved the entire government to a remote, newly built city in the desert, uprooting thousands of lives. His foreign policy was disastrous. While he was composing hymns to the Aten, Egypt's empire in the Near East was crumbling. The Amarna letters, a trove of diplomatic correspondence found in his abandoned city, are filled with desperate pleas from vassal kings begging for Egyptian troops to help them fight off invaders. Pleas that Akhenaten largely ignored. From this viewpoint, he wasn't a prophet. He was a negligent, solipsistic king whose fanaticism brought his empire to the brink of collapse. His people suffered for his vision. So what's the verdict? Prophet or madman? The truth, as it so often is, probably lies somewhere in the middle. Akhenaten was likely a complex individual, a true believer, perhaps with a touch of megalomania, who was given absolute power to enact his vision. He was both a mystic with a beautiful, universal idea, and a deeply flawed ruler who failed his primary duty to his people. He embodies the eternal tension between radical vision and practical reality. His story forces us to ask difficult questions. How much disruption is justified in the pursuit of a higher truth? At what point does unwavering faith become dangerous fanaticism? Akhenaten's legacy is a testament to the fact that one person as prophet can be another as heretic, and that history's judgment is rarely simple or final. Erased from his own history, he has been resurrected in ours, a permanent and fascinating ghost from the golden age of the pharaohs. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life and afterlife of Akhenaten. What do you think? Was he a visionary or a fanatic? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more explorations into the fascinating mysteries of the past. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever wondered what it would take to change the world? Not just a little bit, but to fundamentally alter the beliefs of an entire civilization that had stood for thousands of years. Today, we're journeying back over 3 millennia to the golden sands of ancient Egypt to uncover the story of a pharaoh who tried to do just that. A king who dared to defy the gods, heretic pantheon, and introduce a single, universal deity. This is the story of Akhenaten, the heretic king, the revolutionary pharaoh who tried to change eternity. Imagine ancient Egypt. The lifeblood of the civilization is the Nile River. In its spiritual heart is a complex pantheon of gods. Ra, the sun god; Osiris, the god of the underworld; Isis, the mother goddess. For centuries, these deities governed every aspect of Egyptian life, from the rising of the sun to the journey into the afterlife. Their temples were the centers of economic and political power, their priests wielding immense influence. The entire society was built on this divine foundation, a tradition as old and enduring as the pyramids themselves. Then, a new pharaoh ascends the throne, and everything changes. His name was originally Amenhotep IV. He came to power around 1353 BC, during the height of Egypt's new kingdom, a time of unprecedented wealth and power. But this Amenhotep was different. He wasn't content to simply be another ruler in a long line of pharaohs. He had a vision. A radical, earth-shattering idea that would tear the fabric of Egyptian society apart. Early in his reign, he began to elevate one minor deity above all others. The Aten was not depicted in human or animal form like the other gods. It was represented simply as the solar disk, the physical sun in the sky, with its rays extending down like hands, offering the Ankh, the symbol of life, to the royal family. For Akhenaten, this wasn't just another god to be added to the pantheon. The Aten was the asterisk one, true God, the sole creator, the universal source of all life, not just for Egypt, but for all of humanity. This was a seismic shift. For the first time in recorded history, a leader was championing the idea of monotheism. In the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV made his revolution official. He changed his name to Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten. This wasn't just a name change. It was a declaration of war on the old ways. He then did the unthinkable. He closed the great temples dedicated to the other gods, most notably the powerful cult of Amarna at Thebes. He effectively defunded and disbanded the priesthood that had been the backbone of Egyptian religious life for centuries. Imagine the shock and outrage. It would be like closing every church, mosque, and temple in the world today, all at once. But Akhenaten wasn't finished. He abandoned Thebes, the traditional capital, and built an entirely new city in the middle of the desert. He called it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. This was to be his holy city, a clean slate, a place dedicated solely to the worship of his one true God. He moved the entire royal court, the administration, and thousands of workers to this new, isolated capital. From here, he would rule his new Egypt, an Egypt reimagined in the light of the Aten. Life in Amarna was unlike anywhere else in Egypt. The art style underwent a dramatic transformation. Gone were the idealized, rigid, and muscular figures of traditional pharaonic art. In its place came a strange, almost surreal naturalism. Akhenaten himself was depicted with an elongated skull, a slender neck, a potbelly, and wide hips. His famous queen, Nefertiti, and their daughters were shown in similarly exaggerated forms. Art became more intimate, showing the royal family in candid moments, playing with their children, eating, and expressing affection. It was a shocking break from the formal, divine imagery of past pharaohs. At the heart of this new religion was the great hymn to the Aten, a beautiful piece of poetry discovered inscribed in a tomb at Amarna. It praises the Aten as the universal creator of all life, a loving father to all peoples, not just Egyptians. Some of its passages bear a striking resemblance to Psalm 104 in the Bible, written centuries later, leading many scholars to wonder about the long-term influence of Akhenaten's ideas. He positioned himself and Nefertiti as the sole intermediaries between the Aten and humanity. Only through them could people know the one true God. So, why did he do it? Was Akhenaten a true spiritual visionary, a man ahead of his time who genuinely experienced a divine revelation? Or was this a calculated political move? The priesthood of Amun-Ra had become incredibly wealthy and powerful, at times rivaling the influence of the pharaoh himself. By dismantling their cult, was Akhenaten simply consolidating his own power, reclaiming the economic and political authority that the temples had usurped? The truth is likely a complex mix of both. He was probably a true believer, but one who also understood the political benefits of his revolution. For about 17 years, Akhenaten's vision held. From his isolated city in the desert, he presided over his new world order. But it was not to last. His revolution was too radical, too sudden. For the common people of Egypt, their familiar gods had been taken away. The rituals that guaranteed a safe passage to the afterlife were gone. The traditions that had given their lives meaning were declared heretical. There must have been widespread confusion and resentment bubbling just beneath the surface. When Akhenaten died, his revolution died with him. His successor, who we now know as the famous Tutankhamun, was originally named Tut, but within a few years of taking the throne, the young king abandoned Amarna, moved the capital back to Thebes, and restored the old gods. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of El-Man, a clear rejection of his father's beliefs. What followed was a systematic attempt to erase Akhenaten from history. His name was chiseled off monuments. His temples were dismantled. Their blocks were used in other buildings. His new city of Akhenaten was abandoned to the desert sands, left to crumble into ruin. Later, king lists would jump from his father's reign directly to his successors, as if he had never existed. He became the enemy, or that criminal of Akhenaten. For nearly 3,000 years, his memory was almost completely lost to the world. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists began excavating the ruins of Amarna, that the story of the heretic king was rediscovered. We found the remains of his city, the unique art, the tombs, and the hymns that brought his incredible story back to life. So, what is the legacy of Akhenaten? Was he a madman who nearly destroyed his kingdom, or a visionary genius born in the wrong era? He represents a fundamental human question. Can one person's vision truly change the world, or are we all bound by the powerful currents of tradition and history? His attempt ultimately failed in his own time, but the idea, he unleashed the concept of a single, universal God would echo through the ages, re-emerging in different forms to shape the course of human spirituality forever. Akhenaten tried to change eternity, and in a way, by planting a seed that would one day grow to change the world. Perhaps he succeeded after all.